Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are releasing the third preview for the forthcoming documentary about the PK Man. I'm here with the director and co-producer Lance Mungia of the film. We are still attempting to raise money through a crowdfunder campaign. The links for you, if you're interested in helping us move this project along, will be found in the description of this video. And before we show you the preview, Lance and I are going to share a few tidbits about what we are continuing to learn about the remarkable career of Ted Owens, the PK Man. Welcome, Lance.
Hi, Jeffrey, and thanks for having me back again, and thank you for continuing to make this movie for me. We're sort of full steam ahead, and still, again, just trying to raise funds to finish the documentary. We're still planning to go out and gather some more interviews and that kind of thing for this. And I thought that today would be fun to talk about, I think, one of the more interesting aspects of the whole Ted Owens story that often really gets overlooked, because Ted Owens, being this person who claimed to do all of these amazing things with his mind, claimed that the powers came from the space intelligences. And I thought it's a really interesting subject. And synchronistically, I've met several people over the years that have claimed to have somewhat similar experiences to the kinds of things that happened to Ted Owens, that claimed that really sort of amped up his psychokinetic abilities and allowed him to do these things. And these encounters with these sort of mantis-looking, kind of grasshopper-looking insect beings. And it's something that originally, several years ago, I wasn't really familiar with, but that I've become very familiar with just because of the literature and because of a lot of experiences that people have, like sometimes randomly, like I'll strike up a conversation with someone and they'll bring up these beings, which I find really interesting. But Jeffrey, maybe you could tell us a little bit about like what his connection to these beings really was.
Well, when I first encountered Ted Owens, the nomenclature that's now very popular, mantid beings, wasn't around at all. And so when he described these insectoid beings from whom he seemed to derive his remarkable powers, I didn't know what to make of it. And it did seem weird and strange. Subsequently, we have learned, I've actually interviewed on this channel a fellow named David J. Brown. We recently released his video about DMT entities, and he claims that under the influence of DMT, he had an experience almost 50 years ago in which a mantid-like being appeared and operated on his brain. And he claims that he's never been the same since, that it opened up all sorts of psychic and intuitive abilities, and that he remembers that day and he thinks about it every day of his life since then. So his story, although completely different in origin than Ted Owens, seems remarkably similar, and he even drew a picture of the mantid-like being operating on his brain. We'll show it here. And so that's very, very similar to the report I got from Ted Owens that I just honestly didn't know what to make of it. He also claimed, well, they're not really insectoid. He said they're actually energy beings, but they take the shape of an insect, but that's not really who they are. He claimed that they were hyperdimensional and that they lived in a giant invisible UFO hovering over the planet, and that he would send them telepathic messages to perform various functions, affect the weather, affect a volcano, affect a hurricane or a tornado, a drought or a cold spell or a heat spell or a football team or a basketball team. And they, for reasons of their own, were happy to comply for the most part. And so that's how he produced over 160 demonstrations over a 20-year period. He was quite consistent in the sense that roughly 2/3 of those demonstrations worked out the way he said they would.
These mantid beings seem to be almost like puppet masters in a way. It is the way they're often portrayed in sort of experiencer stories. I know Whitley Strieber, has talked about these sort of grasshopper looking beings sort of being kind of in the background while these small gray beings are walking around sort of interacting directly. Oftentimes there's a sexual component to these stories where there's almost like a hybrid breeding program going on or something, apparently, where these beings are involved, and they tend to just pop up in the literature of the alien abduction, ET abduction, sort of experience again and again. What's interesting is before I even got into any of this, when I first got into meditation, it was probably 2011, 2012, I had a meditation where these two very tall, like mantis looking sort of beings, but in these like kind of robes, were standing over me and like looking down, and they were wearing these robes with all these kind of hieroglyphics on it. And it kind of shocked me out of the meditation at the time. And that was my only experience with them. I had no other knowledge of them whatsoever until many years later, starting to work on Third Eye Spies and going to some conventions and things like that. And then I would start to hear these stories. And now sometimes people will just come up and tell me these stories about these beings.
I'm pretty sure, Lance, considering that Ted Owens claimed that he was an experiment of the space intelligences, like a canary in the coal mine, that were going to endow him with these powers in order to, the way he expressed it, to conduct something of a sociological experiment. How would the human community respond to a person who had his enormous talent? And if that scenario is correct, and I don't see anything contradicting it, then I'm sure the space intelligences are also observing you and me and this activity that we're engaged in now with the documentary. And for all I know, will also be affecting the viewers.
What's interesting about these mantid beings, and it sort of plays to what Ted Owens had said regarding them being, possibly like beings of energy that then kind of come into the world in this form, is a lot of the other stories where people will have screen memories. Like sometimes, like with Mike Cleland's book on owls, like, they'll talk about just seeing these kind of like owl eyes and having this strange memory of owls before there's an abduction experience. Other times, I heard a story from a very high-ranking CIA person that we interviewed for Third Eye Spies, how a physicist friend of his kept having these experiences when he would go out to his cabin in the woods, and he would see this raccoon, standing on two legs and like beckoning to him, and then he would lose hours of time, and then come to like on his bed in his cabin. Kind of sounds like Rocket Raccoon or something from the Marvel movies, really. But, this was long before that. It just makes you think, like, what was that? And are these beings able to actually manipulate our perception to the point that they can make us see whatever we want to see or what they want us to see? So that also would explain Owens's sort of evolution as to like what he was seeing over the years, because it didn't start with the mantid beings. He had this UFO experience, which we dramatize in some film footage that we're going to show you today. But this was in 1955, and then he had started having other experiences where he thought, like, what was it? He was seeing the spirit of nature, and it was this kind of like ghostly apparition of a woman that he would see, and other things, and then it eventually evolved into Twitter and Tweeter, the grasshopper-like beings. Is that right?
Well, originally he thought it was a female entity he called Big Lorney, who was something of a poltergeist. But yes, so it evolved over time, and his explanations about was he using his own psychokinesis, or was he simply telepathing messages to the space intelligences who were performing everything? There was a lot of ambiguity around that.
I was really lucky to spend some time with Jacques Vallée when we were making The Phenomenon together, because he was an advisor on that film, and he would come out to where we were editing on the weekends and we would just chat. And, Jacques has been researching the subject far more than anybody probably alive today. I mean, he's been doing it since he was in his early 20s. And what is he, in his 80s now? And he really kind of at this point throws his hands up in the air and says, you know what, the entire phenomenon doesn't make sense. And he's no longer convinced that it even is extraterrestrial. You know, the explanation of energy that you brought up earlier, Jeffrey, that this was energy that can kind of somehow form into a certain appearance, is not as unlikely as I think some people might think, you know, because like the way Jacques would put it is it's like, this appears in whatever shape it needs to appear in order to teach us something or to grow, really, is what his explanation kind of, I think, is in some of his books. And, you know, it's almost like holographic in nature, you know, and that the universe, you know, whether it be fairies in the, 16th century or, manted beings, you know, in spaceships today, it's kind of like, where are we at as a society and what can we sort of accept as what is paranormal?
Well, we will have just released, before this video gets released, an interview with Tom Campbell, the author of My Big Toe. And he likes to refer to the larger consciousness system, which is in control of this physical reality. He created this physical reality. He would say we're living in a simulation, but very much like we're inside of a computer game. And the larger consciousness system, whether it's manted beings or reptilians or angels or fairies, the larger consciousness system has the ability to interject these entities into our physical reality and does so for the purpose of helping us to awaken to our larger consciousness. And actually, that's the deeper message of the Ted Owens story, I think.
This isn't as much about what someone enabled Ted Owens to do. It's more about what are we all capable of being able to do? And what's interesting about a lot of these experiencer stories is that that's often what it really comes down to is it appears like, you know, there's this energy that exists that is trying to push us forward somehow. And again, another thing I think we've gotten into in a previous interview is once you experience something that is so far outside of your norm, it's like something breaks in your reality. And then people will start to have all sorts of different experiences. And this is something that in ufology is sort of the dirty little secret, you know, in that a lot of these experiencers will have an encounter with a craft or a being of some kind. And then lots of strange things will start happening around them. And often it's things that they don't talk about. This reminds me of a story of a record executive that was friends with a UFO researcher friend of mine. And he had seen a UFO, you know, and he had spoken to my researcher friend about it. And he kind of confided that the strangest thing, and he feared he was actually losing his mind over this, was he started to have other experiences after that weren't UFO related, but were sort of poltergeist related. And in one instance, the weirdest one, which he was very embarrassed to even talk about, he said he was sitting at his mixing panel late one night, working alone in the studio, and he hears what sounds like a band playing. And he looks over his shoulder, and walking through the doorway is a line of literal fairies with musical instruments, playing musical instruments and then going out the other side of the door. And he's sitting there, he says, I don't do drugs. I wasn't drunk. You know, I there was nothing wrong with me at that time, but I think I might be losing my mind. And these are the sorts of things that you hear that are so bizarre and sound so fanciful that people just won't discuss them. But oftentimes it's after an initial paranormal experience, like seeing a UFO. So what does that really say?
A classic case is Kenneth Arnold, the fellow in 1947 who was flying his small aircraft near Mount Rainier when he first saw what he identified as flying saucers and started the whole UFO flap. He also had these personal experiences, and I think we now know about this because his family members have come out and reported on it, but it was kept under wraps for decades.
But it is very common. And even with Jacques told a story about investigating a UFO case, and the witnesses would describe a certain symbol on a craft that multiple witnesses saw that were verified. And then Jacques went and researched this symbol, and he said, I believe the witnesses saw something, but the symbol turns out to be a cow brand of a local rancher in the area. We said, so how do I reconcile that? He says, it's like someone's playing a practical joke, a cosmic practical joke. Like why are you using a local cow brand as a symbol on a UFO? It doesn't make any sense. And again, sort of leads to what Jock would call this sort of like trickster energy, where like what we're seeing may not necessarily be what we're actually seeing.
It's archetypal. I'm sure a Jungian psychologist would have a lot to say about it. But here's a key point, Lance. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if our viewers, just from watching this 20-minute video that you've just put together, have experiences of their own. And I'm sure we'd be very happy to hear from viewers who would like to report on anything they notice in their lives after watching our little video.
Yeah, please. I mean, write that in the comments down below. I would love to hear anybody's story. And also you can go to our crowdfunding campaign page and you can leave messages there as well. We'd love it if you'd become a contributor, but even if you just want to start a dialogue, I've had a couple of people reach out and ask about possibly starting a Discord page or something like that where we can have dialogue about these kinds of things, because there's not a lot of places that people can go to talk about this kind of stuff. I'm happy to be a venue, for that. But I agree that like just even watching a movie can influence your consciousness somehow. I think that's a real thing. I mean, there's stories about people watching like a Poltergeist or The Exorcist or something, and then something will fly across the room or something. And I've heard stories like that. And it may just be, again, kind of you'll see something and it acts as a permission slip for you to then have similar experiences. So what we're going to show is initially it's the 5-minute teaser that you've seen before, just for people who haven't seen it yet, just to set the story. And then these are a collection of scenes that are not necessarily appearing in the order they're going to be in the final film, but we do start with Ted's origin story with these manted beings and sort of seeing a craft in 1955, and then going through some of the other aspects of his work. These are all rough scenes. We're giving you a preview of some rough scenes. We're still going to go out and get more interviews. That's what we still really need, and we need support for this. We need the help of regular contributors like you guys, and I'm incredibly grateful for the people that have already contributed. We're going to be sending out some of the perks soon. There's some really interesting perks on there. You can get a class that Jeffrey curated that was done by Ted Owens, as well as some other advanced looks at things. So we hope you enjoy the footage. I guess we should just sign off and let people watch it.
Fella, a friend of mine in Chicago saw an article today in which you say some nasty things about me in the Tatler. You even have the gall to insinuate, as he explained it long distance, that I might be a fake and a phony. Let's take it one step at a time. You have to be stupid. Dumb. No one in this world in their right mind would take me on. Not after I have documented causing hurricanes with my mind. Also control military forces. Heal people given up by doctors for dead. Control radar installations. Control pro football and basketball teams. And on and on. And mind you, we are speaking of documented before-the-fact action.
168 different demonstrations he performed over a period of 20 years. 2/3 of them worked out the way he said they would, for events that by chance alone you wouldn't expect.
You have chosen to insult me, and I say you are a dirty, low-down, yellow coward. That's what I label you. I am 52 years old with a pot belly and years out of condition. But it would be a pleasure to give you a lesson in manners.
Ted Owens, self-professed master of mind over matter that could control nature itself by the force of psychokinesis, or PK, and he would be the greatest teller of tall tales in history, if not for the evidence.
And also predicted he could make some UFOs appear. Even that happened, published in the newspapers.
He creates what he calls a picture, a PK map, an image of what he wants to have happen. He focuses on that image. He sends the image telepathically to invisible aliens hovering above the Earth in a giant UFO he calls the space intelligences. They sit in front of a big screen and they make all of these things happen.
Mine is perhaps the greatest story in the entire history of the world. UFO entities have given me an advanced brain, the brain of future men. Now they want to see what I will do with it, and whether I will misuse my powers. So far, I have not.
He called himself the PK Man.
Lightning is my specialty.
It was January or February 1955. Ted Owens was driving with his daughter Lori on a lonely road outside Fort Worth. It was the day that, for PK Man, it all began to come together.
This is amazing! Daddy, look! What's that?
It vanished like a breath held too long, as if the sky itself had blinked. To Ted Owens, it was no accident. It was the beginning of something vast, a signal cast across the silence of space, answered not with words, but with presence. What came next would strip away the veil of the ordinary, rewire his mind, and draw him into a shadow war between the waking world and something far stranger, something watching.
Out and he completes this one to Dodson. Key over the middle, wide open is Dodson with a first down.
After the sky blinked shut, something opened in him, a whisper at first. Ideas came unbidden, maps, storm paths, pressure lines that pulse like veins across the land. He wasn't just seeing the weather anymore. He was inside it, and behind it all, a presence watching from somewhere beyond the clouds, waiting to be heard. He got out of his chair one day, walked outside, and decided he could call down lightning. He went for a walk near the rural southern farmhouse where he resided with his wife and demanded lightning strike. It did. The ensuing storm scattered his wife's laundry, and she berated him for bringing the weather down on them. It wasn't the first or last insult he would ever receive in the face of such miracles.
And I have waited too long, over long, for some cooperation from somebody. Waiting for some scientists somewhere to make an approach.
It's February 5th, 1976, Palo Alto, California. All over the city, residents look up to the sky and witness something extraordinary.
He said, well, I'm going to create a snowstorm of the like that you've never seen there in Northern California. And it's going to snow like hell over this next weekend. And it'll be published in your newspaper, your local newspaper. There'll be such a big snowstorm that the papers will write about it because there's been nothing like there for 50 years.
January 25th, 1976. To the scientists I know, gentlemen, it is time to give you a demonstration, to strike fear into your hearts. I am not your ordinary, orthodox human.
This all occurred, the exchange of telegrams occurred on a weekend, and by the next Monday, we had an enormous snowstorm, and nobody could imagine where it came from because it was not forecast.
Inside the labs of Stanford Research Institute, two of the CIA's top scientists, Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, watch, stunned. Their focus, not on the weather, nor the psychics they tasked to remotely view Soviet secrets, but on the man who claimed he would make this happen.
So I've been in California now for 62 years, and the only snowstorm that I can recall ever happening is the one that was sent to us by Ted Owens.
Although it was not known why we were doing it, but it's generally known in the public that we're looking for people to come forward with examples of paranormal experiences. We were contacted by Ted Owens, who said that he had a lifetime of really remarkable experiences.
He would like to come to SRI and show us their flying saucers and their rainstorms, and that's the exact opposite of what we wanted to do with a low-profile program. He got very angry with me.
Despite their curiosity, Owens was too hot for the scientists at SRI to handle.
Obviously, for the official program we had at SRI, we had to be very meticulous in a scientific sense, but nonetheless it was very evocative.
You and Hal were very excited about this character, Ted Owens. He had a big file sitting on a shelf that you and Hal were eager to get rid of. And
Exactly.
So they decided to quietly hand off the box of files, correspondence and newspaper clippings they accumulated on him to the young intern, PhD candidate Jeffrey Mishlove.
168 different demonstrations he performed over a period of 20 years. The files contain letters sent in advance to scientists talking about the effects that he would claim to produce through psychokinesis. My conclusion was that roughly 2/3 of them worked out the way he said they would. And for events that by chance alone you wouldn't expect, like a volcano, more than a 1% likelihood. Large-scale effects.
This moment marked the beginning of Jeffrey Mishlove's lifelong journey. As perhaps the world's only PhD in parapsychology, who has dedicated his life to studying the paranormal and bringing it to a larger audience.
Why are we, the award recipients here, so many intelligent, well-educated people willing to risk our careers to study the afterlife? For me, the answer is simple. It's about self-knowledge. And to the extent that the human civilization ignores this area of research, we are lacking in self-knowledge.
He was uniquely qualified to become, for a time, Ted Owens' best and perhaps only friend.
To my amazement, Jeffrey, you, a young man, a young scientist, are the only scientist, including the grayheads, to make a breakthrough and, quote, come to where I am, end quote, parapsychologically. Rhine couldn't understand. Sprinkle couldn't grasp it. It was beyond Hynek. Dr. Fogel couldn't break through. Targ and Puthoff couldn't grasp it. Only Jeffrey Mishlove has made it.
And consciousness.
Best to you, always, Ted Owens, PK Man.
However, such friendship comes at a cost.
Jeffrey?
Called me on the phone. He said, Jeffrey, in his big booming voice, this is the most important phone call you will ever receive. It's up to you. You have to notify the U.S. government not to send the next space shuttle into outer space. He said, because my UFOs are angry and they're going to knock it out of the sky.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded.
And that was 3 weeks before the Challenger explosion.
There is no precedent for me unless one goes back to the time of Moses. But as time passed, I have demonstrated a regular rainbow of miracles.
Over the years, Owens became ever more frustrated with the lack of seriousness his abilities had garnered scientifically. Finally, he decided to demonstrate his vast powers at the expense of several sports teams that would eventually come to rue the name PK Man. Ted Owens was perhaps most well known publicly for claiming to manipulate sporting events using his mysterious powers of psychokinesis. He said they were demonstrations of his ability, and he became so infamous for his unusually accurate jinxes that even owners of football teams would reach out.
Dear Mr. Owens, please believe me when I request that you remove us from your list of losers. If you will please advise me as to a course of action which we could follow to have us removed from this category. I will do whatever I can to comply. I note with a great deal of interest your record of accomplishments. I thank you for considering this request. Sincerely, Carol Rosenblum, President, the Baltimore Colts.
Unfortunately, perhaps for them, they never wanted to pay his fees to stop his interference, which only caused Owens to double down. Perhaps no team was more affected by his high jinx than the 1968 Philadelphia Eagles, who experienced by far their worst year in specific ways Owens claimed to cause, often by sitting at home and attempting to manipulate specific plays by focusing on the TV from the comfort of his easy chair.
The Eagles, as usual, were decided underdogs. A web-footed eagle named Tom Woodashik slogged through the swamps for 79 sloppy yards.
To the Philadelphia Eagles. Several years ago, when Jerry Woolman still owned your team, Stan Hockman asked me face-to-face if a change in the ownership of the Eagles, plus a new coach, plus new personnel, could stop my PK attack on the Eagles. I told him then, instantly, that it could not stop the PK attack. Nothing can stop my mind from beating you. year in and year out. The PK works in 1,000 ways. It will get the coach fired, make the owner go bankrupt. It's a huge, monumental jinx. I'll simply refer you to a column Stan Hotchman wrote about me several years ago, after he'd taken me to a football game, and I'd sent PK after one man, Tom Woodchick, number 37.
And one was number 37, 225-pound fullback Tom Woodchick. In each of his 6 seasons with the Eagles, he's gained more yardage than he gained the year before.
Tom Woodchick, telling the PK to get Woody out of the game.
What's the matter with you, Woody? Her clavicle, what? Clavicle. Tender on the joint?
Right there. I got one hair on my chest, and you had to put it on that hair, didn't you? I was after it.
Tom Woodchick was lucky. In spite of injuries, he played in every game. Less than half the Eagles players were so lucky. Many could not return at all. All the young linebackers were injured. Ike Kelly, Arunas Vazis, and number 35, Adrian Young. Veteran All-Pro tackle and defensive leader Floyd Peters missed most of the season due to injuries. Frank Molden, who after 2 years of injuries, missed 2 months of 1968 with a broken leg. Elected co-captain of the Eagles by his teammates, Woody said, "I won't make any fiery speeches. I'll show them by example." It was an example none of his teammates will forget.
And in 10 minutes, Woodchick rushed out onto the field, hit a cowboy in the face, and was thrown out of the game by the officials. In his write-up, Stan Hotchman said, "But what flash of insanity provoked him, Woodchick, to rush off the bench with his fist flurry? Ted Owens did it. Honest."
He called himself the PK Man.
Lightning is my specialty.